and it is officially time to start. It is 6:15 UK time here in London. So welcome guys, we are live from Lambeth. If anyone was very new to me, you're very welcome. I'm Nathalie, and feel free to use the chat, ask me any questions you might have. I might know or I might not know, but I'll try. And if the chat is a little bit busy tonight, don't get offended if I've missed any of your questions. Just try again. And without further ado, let's go. So I know some of you might expect me to be burning a little Guy Fawkes right now, because that is what I did last year and the year before. I had a little illustration I had made of Guy, and I burned him live, because that's what we do, right, on Bonfire Night. I've decided not to do that because, well, it's a little bit controversial actually. In some countries, we're not meant to be burning effigies, and I don't want to be too controversial on YouTube, so I'm not burning Guy tonight. Although, no one said we cannot give a little Guy to old Father Thames, right? So here is a little Guy. You can admire my pottery talents. A Guy, by the way, it is a Guy Fawkes. We used to, back in the days, we used to make effigies, still today, but not as much. We used to make effigies of Guy Fawkes. First, it was the Pope. They used to burn the Pope, but then they would do Guy as well, and they would use their old items of clothing, you know, those dirty old clothes. So with time, the name Guy became how you'd call someone on the street. Any guy, especially working class people with scruffy old dirty clothes, you'd call them a Guy. Well, that's how we got the name Guy. You know, like when you say, hey guys, that actually comes from Guy Fawkes. So if any of you didn't know the story, you know, it's very well known in all the countries from the British Empire, but not necessarily from everywhere, anyone across the globe. But Guy actually comes from Guy Fawkes, would you believe? Anyway, there he is. Bye, bye. Woohoo! That was a nice splash. That's quite funny to imagine the mudlarkers that might come tomorrow or the day after, because you know, the Thames River is tidal. It goes up and down following the sea levels, and when the tide is out, you have those mudlarkers searching in the mud, because London is old. You can still find some Roman pottery or some Roman coins. So I can imagine when someone finds him, they'll probably be like, hey, do you think this is Roman? And they'll be like, oh no, he looks a bit Jacobean to me. So they might even take it to the Museum of London and be like, what do you think this is? Anyway, I decided to start the tour here because across the street here, the building that's in the dark, that looks a little bit Tudor, it's Lambeth Palace. It's the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury. So he was, or is is the big boss in terms of the Church of England. And at the time of Guy Fawkes, actually, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he was not too extreme. He didn't like the Catholics, of course, but he didn't really like the Puritans either. Neither did the king. And also on this side of the river, you had some lodgings that belonged to one of our conspirators, Catesby. Catesby was actually the brain. I know we call it Guy Fawkes night, but really we should call it Catesby's night. I'll tell you why through the tour, but yeah. So that's the lodging that was the little lodging on this side of the river that they were using as conspirators. But before to tell you about Guy and about Catesby, I need to tell you a little bit about the background story. At the beginning of the 1600s, or even in the late 1500s, you'd have to know that really religion was not an option. Religion was everything. And you'd have to go to church, and you couldn't choose your church. You'd have to go to your local Church of England church. So, you know, some people still practiced the old faith, Catholicism. but that was illegal. They'll have to go to their local church. If not, they used to get fined. They were called the recency fines because of the term in Latin recusare, that is to reject. So the recusants, they were rejecting the Church of England, and they still followed the Pope. So just a little recap. If we go back in time, you might have heard, of course, about the Reformation, Henry VIII, that broke up with the Catholic Church to create the Church of England. Henry, although he did change the religion of the country, he was still a Catholic at heart, really. But after Henry, at the time of Queen Elizabeth I, she was quite rough with the Catholics, and those young men that became radicalized, because that's the term we would use today, they would have witnessed horrors. Because if you want to be a Catholic, you have to follow a Catholic priest. You have to go to Catholic masses. At the time of Queen Elizabeth I, most of the Catholics had learned to basically keep their heads down. They were actually church popists. They would go to Protestant church, and because they couldn't face those fines. So it's only the rich that really could rebel and face those recusancy fines. The government was making millions in today's money with those fines. And also, those Catholic priests, they had to be hidden. And if they were caught giving an illegal mass in a pub or in a private home, they would be killed. They would be hanged, drawn and quartered, or even burned. So those young men, as little boys, they would have grown up in those Catholic families with their parents paying those horrible fines, maybe sometimes even seeing their Jesuit priest being executed. And they somehow had hope. Because, of course, Queen Elizabeth I was not eternal. She was going to die one day. And they were hoped that the next in line could be a Catholic, with Mary, Queen of Scots and all that. And then they had hopes when it became quite clear that James I was going to be next in line. They had hopes with James, because although he was a Protestant, he was the son of a Catholic martyr, Mary, Queen of Scots. And he had been... James was already King of Scotland, and he was a very good politician. He would make you believe whatever you wanted to hear, like the politicians today, really, when they want your vote. And one of our future conspirators actually went to see the king just months before he became King of England. Thomas Parsi went to see James. He was trying to get confirmation that James was going to be more tolerant with the Catholic community. And James found a way to make him believe that indeed it was going to be the case. He probably did not really have much intention to do so, but some of the fireworks would have been last night, Harvey, I think. There might be some more later on tonight, but I've not seen the official one. I can hear some little private ones. And so yeah, they had a lot of hope with James I. And when he accessed the throne, to be fair, he did kind of paused the recusancy fines. So they were even more hopeful with the new king, and then, because of pressure from his parliament, he reintroduced them, and then those boys were fuming, It's kind of like, once you get, it's kind of like giving them hope and then trying to put the genie back in the bottle. So that's why those young men were raging, and that's why they came to this crazy idea of getting rid of the king, really. Now you'd have to know that plotting at the time was not new. Thank you, Leslie. We had a lot of plotters. at the time of Queen Elizabeth I, to give you an idea, her chief, what they would have called at the time intelligencer. So it's basically spies. You know, the term is anachronical, of course, but at the time they were gathering intelligence. William Cecil was doing that for her, and he stopped 7 attempts on the Queen's life, and he's actually the one that framed Mary Queen of Scots. For the ones that don't know, by the way, the building straight ahead in the middle, that's Parliament. We'll see it a bit later on as well at the end of the tour, but that's why I'm showing you this view. And so yeah, there were a lot of spies all across the country. Christopher Marlowe might have been a spy. Shakespeare might have been a spy. You'd have to know that at the time in Europe, it was a bit, I might be exaggerating a bit, but not really. It was a bit like a Cold War, really, between the Catholics and the Protestants. So you'd have to keep yourself informed of what was happening in Europe and if people were not plotting against you. Those young men that became our conspirators, they could not study in England because, well, if you wanted to graduate from let's say Oxford or Cambridge, you'd have to swear oath on the Queen, and of course they could not swear oath on Queen Elizabeth I because the Pope had excommunicated her. So those young men had to go learn in Spain or in Catholic countries, but then you become a potential enemy of the state, even a potential spy, because of course until 1604 we were at war with Spain. So you can imagine how those young men were already kind of spotted on spied on by the secret services. And talking about the spies, the building straight ahead there, that's the MI5. So this is the military intelligence number 5. So that's the domestic intelligence. So anything happening here on British soil. On the other side of the river, we've got the famous MI6 that you might have heard of if you've seen James Bond. They make it explode in Skyfall. Today, of course, the official secret services, as we know them today, they were created in 1909 by a chap called Menfield Cunming. He was a character. He used to interview the spies, and he had a wooden leg, and he used to stab his own leg through the interview to see if the recruit was reacting, and if they were not reacting, they were a good recruit. But it doesn't mean that spying is actually new. Actually, the golden age of spying, it is in Elizabethan times. And in 1604, the spy master was Robert Cecil. So he's the son of William Cecil, the one that was helping Elizabeth. And just gonna cross again, bear with me. The man was extremely smart. He was a little guy, 5'4", I think he was, and he was a bit, he suffered from scoliosis, so he was a little bit hunchback. Queen Elizabeth I, actually, she used to call him my little elf. And well, James I used to call him my little pygmy. So not very nice. But he was of remarkable intelligence. So we can imagine. Well, Harvey, that's true. Yes, through the Cold War, we also had a lot of spying. Yeah, a different type, but yeah. And I think there's been an accident here. Right, I'm gonna try to go quite quick because I don't want anyone to think that I'm filming the accident. So yeah, by the way, I've watched the video of the last time I did this tour, talking. What's happening? I don't know why they're all running to film. It's just. Why are they all filming? I don't get it. It looks like I'm going the wrong way. It looks like I shouldn't go this way. Anyway, let's see. Why is everyone filming? I don't understand. Okay, so what was I saying? Yeah, by the way, Cecil, he was the Earl of Salisbury. Because last time I did this tour, I realized that sometimes I called him Cecil, sometimes I call him Salisbury. So just so you know, it is the very same man. No, it's not professional cameras, it's everyone with their phone, so I don't know what's happening, but hey ho. Anyway, while we're here, see the name of the street, Thorney Street. This is actually an interesting name. Thorney was a little island, or a little eight really, because we're talking about an island on the river. This area here used to be an island. All the area that today we refer to as you know, Westminster Abbey and Parliament, back in the days it was a little island, because we used to have those lost rivers like the River Tyburn, and the River Tyburn finished here in some kind of a delta. I'll show you a little image so you can get an idea. Oops. See, this is Westminster, and at the time, so you can see those two arms of the river. So this was the island of Thorney. That meant that if you were trying to dig a tunnel, that'll be very tricky, because it'll be very wet, particularly wet. And anyway, those young men, originally it was only 5 of them. They met in a pub, and let me cross over. Oop. So the original 5, they had been invited by Robert Catesby. Robert or Robin Catesby was, he was this type of guy that had a little something. You know, this type of gentleman that, you know, he could sell ice to an Eskimo. You know, he had this little je ne sais quoi, this little something that you would fall into his charms, you know. So he invited a few people, Thomas Parsi, John Wright, and of course Guy Fawkes. You've lost me? What did you mean? Did we lose signal? Are we back then? Let me know in the chat if we are all back. Let me show you a photo of Catesby. Oh yeah, okay, I got the chat back. Good, perfect. Oh, good, thank you guys. I had lost the chat for a second. Good, so I'll just go back a minute. So I was telling you about Catesby. Catesby was the brain behind this operation, and he invited his friends into a pub. Not this pub here. This is the Marquis of Granby. We have a lot of pubs in London called the Marquis of Granby, because he was a military general, and he was kind of training his men that were too old to fight to open pubs. So that's why you see a lot of pubs called the Marquis. So I'll just go back to the minute you've missed. I was telling you that originally the conspirators were only 5. And they had been invited into this pub, the Dark and Drake, on the Strand, by Catesby. Let me show you a photo of Catesby. Of course, it's not the original Catesby. It's Kit Harington from Game of Thrones. Kit is probably the perfect actor to play Catesby, because, well, first, he's actually a descendant of Robin Catesby, and he's got this, because Catesby had this little je ne sais quoi, this little charms that would make you follow him. You'd listen to him, you know. And he was the type of guy that could sell ice to an Eskimo. And Well, I say Kit is a descendant of Catesby. He is, but he's also a descendant of one of the many bastards of James I. He's got an interesting ancestry. And so those young men together in that pub decided to go for this horrible plan that today we would call terrorism. Now, I'm glad this church is here because this is St. John's of Smith Square. We don't see much because it's not lit tonight, but you know, sometimes the goal does require crazy means. We have had some terrorists in history that we love. I'm talking about the suffragettes. This is where Emmeline Pankhurst had her funerals. And ironically, the suffragettes, they actually tried to bomb this very church. So in terms of the definition of terrorism that we have today, the suffragettes, you know, they've used bombs, they've used arson. They've been lucky not to kill anyone apart from themselves, but, you know, they could have. So, you know, sometimes, as Catesby used to say, a disease can require so sharp a remedy. So Catesby was this type of guy that, you know, he could convince you to do anything. And together they came up with that crazy plan of course, blowing off the king, but not only the king, the entire Stuart institution. At the opening of Parliament that day, everyone would be there. You'd have well, the king, the queen, all the lords. You'd have the little prince, the heir to the throne, Henry, not Charles. I know people tend to forget because, of course, the next king after James I was Charles I, the one that was famously executed. But Charles was actually the spare. He was not the heir. He had an older brother called Henry that was actually much more popular than him. But Henry died in, I think, 1612, at the age of 18, I think it was. So he never actually ruled. And little Charles became next in line. Charles, it's not quite clear whether he would have been present at Parliament or not, because he was still quite young. So not only did the king, you know, did they target the king, but everyone would have died. I mean, that would have had a massive impact, really. At the beginning, well, according to some, at the beginning they tried to dig some tunnels. Apparently, there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence that they tried, and none of them did have the knowledge about tunneling. Guy Fawkes had a relatively unknown about a population of thousands. I'm going to try to walk quite quick to. Oh, that's a shame. So yeah, all those recusants, they were definitely quite well known by the spy master, you know, Robert Cecil, especially Catesby. Catesby had been involved in the Essex rebellion, and Guy Fawkes, coming from abroad, he had spent 10 years abroad. He was relatively unknown, so he could be bringing the barrels of gunpowder. So, oh, you lost me after none of them. Okay, so I was good. You've not lost. I'll just go back a minute in time. So I was telling you that none of them had any knowledge in gunpowder, in tunneling, but some definitely did have knowledge of gunpowder. Guy Fawkes. That's why they hired Guy, because he was really good with warfare. It seems quite odd, but population of only especially Catesby, because Catesby had been involved in the Essex rebellion. So Guido was perfect for the job because he could come, you know. So that's why they took him on board, and he was the one that loaded up the gunpowder. gunpowder at the time was relatively easy to find because they had been producing a lot of them for the war effort, the war with Spain. But we were no longer at war with Spain, so there was a surplus. There was too much gunpowder, so it was fairly easy to buy it. He bought it from Rotherhithe along the river, and he could bring it into barrels one by one or two by two. At the time, anything could be stored in a barrel, really. You could have tea, rum, sugar, anything could be in a barrel. So it was not any suspicious or anything like that. And at that point, they had managed to secure a little lodging just next to Parliament, because Thomas Parsi had been milking his relationship with Lord Northumberland, and he had managed to find himself a little job, which was quite ironic, a job as some kind of guard for the king and the building. You might have heard of it as a cellar, a basement. It was not a basement. It's actually just because it's very busy in the area, but oh no. Well, oh no, I've lost most of you now. Oh. Am I completely gone? I don't understand how I can be completely gone. They might have... Are we back? Yes, good. Well, I've lost everyone pretty much, but I hope they'll come back. Okay, good. I'll just give it a minute maybe so people can come back, because we've lost most of the people. So we were saying that they had pushed back the opening of Parliament because of the plague. Because through the summer months you have more rats and you have more fleas in the rats. So they had pushed back the opening of Parliament, so the conspirators had a few more months, and then that gave them more ideas. And that's how they started to hire more conspirators. Some of the conspirators took their little brother on board, and eventually they ended up being 13. The 13th conspirator was Tresham, Francis Tresham, and they should have never asked Tresham to join them, because he was completely rejecting the idea from day one. This is the beautiful Westminster Abbey, by the way. The Abbey is, of course, right next to Parliament. And would you believe, if it had indeed exploded, we know now, they've done a BBC a show called Exploding the Legend. They've rebuilt the building with the same quantity of gunpowder and everything. And the blow would have been so massive that the windows of the Abbey would have broken. So there could have been a lot of collateral damage. Like myself standing here, I could have been hit by one of the broken glass from the Abbey's window. So it's hard to imagine how many people would have died, but probably even more than the number of people in Parliament. And I'm glad you're back, Angie. I'm going back into the story, so you shouldn't have lost much, hopefully. It's hard to know exactly when it cut, but hopefully. So yeah, they ended up with those few extra months recruiting more. And Tresham, he had his brother-in-law, Lord Monteagle, that would have been at Parliament that day, because some of the lords were actually Catholics, you know. And what building is this? Lauren is asking. So this is Westminster Abbey, and this is St. Margaret's Church. It might be a bit weird to have a church right next to an abbey, but you'd have to know that Westminster Abbey is a royal peculiar, so the king can close it for any reason. So the little church was for the normal people, especially a lot of the lords at Parliament. When the abbey was closed, that they could go into St. Margaret's Church. So yeah, they shouldn't have taken Tresham. because he might have tried to let people know, his friends, not to go to Parliament that day. And some say that's exactly what happened. Because just over a week before the big day, Lord Monteagle, so Lord Monteagle was not a nice guy. He was what they called at the time a church popist. He was a Catholic, but because of his career at Parliament, he was pretending, and he was going to Protestant church. Before we go much further, see those lovely little cross? This is a display for 11th of November. So this is for the soldiers that lost their lives. And so yeah, there was a letter. Someone arrived on horseback. They approached a servant in Hoxton. It was at the time a little village outside of London, which is quite funny because today Hoxton is very much part of London. So they approached Monteagle servant on the street, and they were like, "This is for your master." And they got the servant got the letter to his master, Lord Monteagle, and the letter was a little bit mysterious. It basically said, please try to find an excuse to shift your attendance at Parliament that day, because they might they'll suffer a big blow, the enemies of your religion. So it was scripted, but it was still, fairly easily understood. Monteagle was not a nice man. And what he did next, he jumped on his horse to go and find Cecil, the spy master. And he showed him the letter. I don't think Robert Cecil was very surprised, but who knows? Together they looked at the letter and they were like, a big blow, what could that mean? And Cecil, would you believe, did not act. He kept the letter, didn't say anything to anybody, but the servant that had brought the letter up to Monteagle, he was a strong Catholic himself, and he actually told his friends, Thomas Parcy and all that. So the conspirators, they heard that the letter existed and that it had been found. So they straight away accused Francis Tresham, because he had been reluctant to the idea from day one, and Tresham managed to convince them that it was not him. He swore on the Bible. To be fair, I don't think it could be Tresham, because Tresham could have just gone to see his brother-in-law and just tell him not to come to Parliament. So this very letter, to this day, it's still a mystery. We still don't know who wrote it. It could have been Monteagle himself to get some favours. And if it is, well, that worked, because the guy ended up with a pension, £500 a year or something, so a lot of money at the time. And it could have been Robert Cecil himself. He might have known about the plot for ages, and he wanted to find an excuse to discover it. Some conspiracy theorists even believe that Cecil might have been at the origin of the idea. That's a bit far-fetched, but he probably knew much more than he pretended. And some think it might have been the ladies, the mother, because those 13 conspirators, they had wives, mums, sisters, cousins. Those ladies are not stupid, they knew very well what was going on. So did one of them try to send a letter to stop the plan? It is very much possible. There's an author in Oxford, she's written a fiction about Catesby's mum. It's a fiction, but it's just interesting because, this story is full of testosterone, but really the ladies behind it probably were very much aware. So anyway, this letter, I just stepped on something, but I don't know what it is. This letter ended up in the hands of Cecil, and he didn't do anything. He waited for the king to come back from a hunting party, and then he decided to show it to the king, but just a few days before the opening of Parliament, and he pretended not to have put two and two together. He pretended he didn't get it because he wanted to let the king shine. He wanted the king to be the brain, So he showed it to the king, and the king was like, a big blow. could that be powder? So he ordered a search of Parliament, and then Robert Cecil again waited because he wanted the plan to ripen. And in that few days, the conspirators, they didn't hear any more about the letters, so they believed it was all good because Cecil kept it well secret. So they decided to go on with the plan, and eventually they went for a search under the building. They found a gentleman looking like a servant. He said his name was John Johnson. if you're trying to use an alias, John Johnson is probably not the best one, but yeah. And they spotted a big pile of firewood, a little bit too big for the lodging. They still didn't act. They went back to the king and they told them what they found to again let the king shine, let the king put two and two together. And then the king was like, that could hide powder, you go back. And they went back, they found John Johnson and they arrested him. And as they removed the massive pile of firewood, they found indeed 36 barrels of powder. And John Johnson was taken to the Tower. The Catesby had already started going riding towards the Midland, because the plan was for them to go towards the Midland to kidnap the little Elizabeth, the little princess. She was, I think, 9 years old at the time, but they believed they could marry her to a Catholic and manipulate her. What they didn't know is that the little Elizabeth was actually already a very strong Protestant, and this was completely unrealistic anyway. And when Catesby heard that they had been caught, that Guido was at the Tower, he decided, would you believe, to go on with the plan. This is literally suicidal. He went to the Midlands, he rode with his horse and he knocked at the doors, telling them that the king was dead, trying to have a Catholic uprising. And would you believe that all those recusants, most of them actually treated them like the plague, because they were loyal subjects of the king, you know. They did not want any more drama, you know. That they didn't know it could be even worse, you know, after the king. So they didn't actually join Catesby. So Catesby ended up hiding in a home, Holbeach home in Staffordshire. They were hiding in there, so just a handful of them. And you can see that Guido was not there, because they had realized that they had a little bit of gunpowder left for their muskets, but the powder was wet. It had got wet on the way, so they tried to dry it. Would you believe? They put it next to the fire to dry, and that exploded. So one of them lost his eyesight, and all of them were injured. And for Catesby, that really showed him that God was not with them. God was not smiling at them anymore. And very soon after, the little house was surrounded by the sheriff of Worcester with 200 men. And eventually, Catesby was like, "That's it, we're going out." So they went out and they were shot by the sheriff and his men. And very surprisingly, Thomas Percy and Catesby, they were shot by the same bullet. So that's extremely rare. Catesby did not die straight away. He managed to drag himself until a little chapel where he grabbed a picture of the Virgin Mary. So he tried to die like a martyr. The rest of the conspirators were arrested. Well, not straight away. Guido was taken to the Tower, and he refused to talk. He was indeed tortured. He refused to talk. He wanted to give his friends time to run. The smartest idea for them would have been to run to Catholic Ireland, for example, but Catesby was a bit too stubborn. And eventually they put Guido on the rack. The rack, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a horrible torture instrument where they attach your limb to some kind of a wooden thing, and they basically break you. They break your body, all your joints. I mean, there are very, very few people in history that actually resisted the rack and did not talk. Guido was not one of them. He talked. He gave names. Cecil probably already knew all the names, but he wanted Guido to actually give out his friends. To give you an idea how bad Guido was tortured, let me show you his signature. So here is, oops, that's the before Guy Fawkes, and that's the after. So he's been so badly tortured that he cannot spell his own name. So the man was broken. So 5 of the conspirators were already dead, 4 at Old Beach Home. Then Francis Tresham, he actually died in the tower from urinary infection. So the 8 of them were, of course, hanged, drawn and quartered. 4 of them were quartered and hanged by St. Paul's Cathedral. They would have been dragged behind horses, their head slamming the pavement. Everard Digby, his son was there, and his son was screaming, "Daddy, Daddy!" Imagine the horror. Then they would cut off their genitalia and their willies. That was to signify that they were not worthy of descendants, because they did not want their grandchildren to become traitors. Oh, can you hear Big Ben? And actually, one of them did. You know what? Rookwood, his grandson became a traitor as well. He was a Jacobite. He was plotting against, he wanted to bring back James II, a Catholic. And the 4 others, they were hanged, drawn and quartered here in front of Parliament, in front of the very building that they wanted to blow off. The last one on the scaffold was actually Guy. He luckily for him, we don't know whether he jumped or he felt. He was so broken, he couldn't go up the ladder, and he actually felt and broke his own neck. So he was spared from the horrors of being dismembered. But yeah, horrible sight on execution. And James I decided to celebrate it. It is thanks to James that we still today celebrate 5th of November. It's not that big anymore, and well, obviously I didn't grow up in this country, but my understanding is that, maybe 40 years ago, it was much more of a party. I think like the police there's a lot of police. They're probably a little bit scared of any riots. When I did this 2 years ago, there were actually riots on this night, so that's probably why. So yeah, it's because of James, because it was his lucky day, the 5th of November. That's probably why Cecil pushed to have the opening of Parliament that day. And that showed that God was with the Protestants. That showed that God was with the king. And actually, years later, when William of Orange invaded, to take over the Catholic James II, they did it on 5th of November, again as a show of God's will. And that very story of those 13 radicalized young men, isolated really, because they were not very representative of, they were not necessarily representative of the Catholic majority, but they've given government a stick with which to beat Catholics for years to come. Still today, it's still a religion that, when you hear people make jokes or stuff, they probably make more jokes about Catholics that they would with any other religion. That's all thanks to Guy Fawkes and his fellow conspirators. And anyway, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Exactly, I think Halloween has kind of taken over. And yeah, 5th of November, today it's not massive. We still have fireworks, and well, in some places like Lewis in the south, it's still a massive party, but not so much here. And at the time though, in 1605, London would be very dark in the winter, very, very dark, and November is a very dark time. So those bonfires, those explosion of lights all across the city was amazing. That was like an amazing festival, you know. Today, yeah, Halloween has kind of taken over, and we don't celebrate it as much as it would have been at some point. Thank you, Janie. Right, I'll stay connected a few minutes. Let me know if you have any questions before we go. Hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the little drop in signal, but hopefully I've caught up with the story and you've not missed much. Thank you, Carol. Thanks everyone that left me a little tip as well. If it's on PayPal, buy me a coffee. I will see them after the tour, of course. So if I don't say thank you live, do make sure you know you're very much appreciated. It is thanks to you that I can keep going, you know. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Martina. And if anyone was new to me, if you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to my channel, because it's very easy to miss those lives. YouTube does kind of give some visibilities to the videos, but the lives, I find that most people don't see them if they don't subscribe. And if you want to see more of me, I've got a few more live scheduled already. I'm going to Gdansk in Poland next Sunday. I'm doing Ask Me Anything on Wednesday. So if any of those tours take your fancy, make sure you hit the little bell. This way you'd receive an email when I go live, because it's very easy to miss them. Even if you receive the email, you know, sometimes you're just busy. But it's worth hitting the bell this way. This way you don't miss them. Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, Rose. Thanks, Leslie. Oh, amazing. And thank you, Caroline. Cool. I don't see any more questions, so I think I'm gonna get going. Have a good evening, morning, lunch, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And I'll leave you with this view of Parliament. Down that way, it's the Victoria Tower, so that's the House of Lords. And down this side, next to Big Ben, it's the House of Commons. So politicians that have been voted. Yeah, I also have a Facebook group. It's called Nathalie My Guide. So if you wanted to join that, feel free to do so. Anyway, see you later. Guys, usually I try not to call you guys because I know some feminists think it's not very inclusive. But tonight, because of Guy Fawkes, I'm gonna call you guys, because at least we've got Guy to thanks for this term. See you later. Bye guys. Bye bye.